At a bearing of 28 degrees latitude north and 16 degrees longitude west, a group of 7 islands and numerous islets rise up out of the sea. With its warm climate and unusual landscapes, this archipelago has from time immemorial captivated those who reached its coasts. Here lay perhaps the last traces of the legendary Atlantis or the Elysian fields depicted by Homer in the Odyssey. They were, in short, the Fortunate Islands. The Canary Islands were never a part of any sunken continent. Their origin is quite different and much less romantic. About 30 million years ago, in what is known as the Myocene period, a crack appeared in the African platform. The magma found a way to escape from inside the Earth, and a group of volcanoes appeared on the ocean bed. Over the next 28 million years, the expulsion of material occurred almost continuously, and so by the time the Earth entered the Quaternary era, all of the islands except for Hierro and the islets had risen above the surface. The landscape is almost exclusively the product of volcanoes, which have provided new materials for the islands with each successive eruption. The basic lava flows, called pauoes, form the gentle slopes. They were very fluid and solidified slowly, so they covered large tracts of land before going hard. Rivers of molten material could flow down the sides of the volcano at a speed of 50 kilometers an hour. The opposite occurred when the lava was acidic. The eruptions were much more violent, the materials were much less fluid, and the resulting landscape was much more rugged. Volcanic activity also affected plant life on the islands. The continuous supply of new materials delayed the erosion process and so impeded the creation of soil where trees and bushes could grow. Lichens, a close combination of algae and fungi, were the first to spring up on the lava. Their unequaled powers of resistance enabled them to grow right out of solid rock, something which no other plant could do. Their work was essential. Little by little, they broke down the rock and created organic material. In this way, they prepared the soil for those species that would come after them. As time passed, some soil began to form between the lumps of rock. Herbs, which had adapted after millions of years fighting for survival, settled in these little nooks. Little by little, new species appeared. Specialization reached such an extreme level that up to 50 unique species can be found in the same volcanic crater. The Teide daisy, which is so similar to the common daisy, the tiny Teide violet, which has grey leaves that camouflage it until it flowers, or the stunning tar of jewels, are just a few examples of the variety of shapes, sizes and colors to be found on the lava-covered slopes. Here in the foothills of the highest volcano in the archipelago, the Teide, the plants have taken another step in the adaptation process. Not only do they live in very poor soil, but they can also withstand differences in daytime and nighttime temperatures of up to 50 degrees centigrade. In these conditions, it is not surprising that Canaries has 520 of its own exclusive species, or in other words, 520 endemisms. This makes up 28% of the total flora and fauna. But it was not just the volcanic nature of the islands that caused this situation. If the islands had been in contact with the continent, the exchange of population would have been constant, but they arose from the sea, and it was the sea that isolated them. The arrival of new individuals was such a rare event that over time many species evolved independently, so creating new species. Under the surface, the opposite was true. The islands were never isolated, and the species that inhabit the coasts are the same as those present on the continent, and there is a continuous exchange between different groups. In fact, many of the animals that inhabit these waters do not stay here all year round. They have their own migratory cycles, which can take them in some cases to the other side of the ocean. The water temperature is lower than might be expected because of the geographical position of the islands. The Canaries' cold current is responsible for this. It comes from the north, crosses the archipelago, and turns towards the Americas. It forms part of the Gulf Stream, which crosses the Atlantic clockwise from the Sargasso Sea to Spain and North Africa. The same current that Christopher Columbus used on his voyage of discovery to America in 1492. In these cold waters, zooplankton and phytoplankton have found a suitable habitat where they can develop. The sea fills up with microscopic life and so becomes an enormous food store for marine fauna. Fish, mollusks, and crustaceans of all species live together in an ecosystem that owes its existence almost entirely to the water temperature. As the islands rose up from the depths, reefs were created and a new ecosystem appeared in the ocean. The marine flora found new ground on which to settle, and the fauna found countless nooks and crannies where it could set up home and be safe from predators. The layer nearest the surface, and therefore also nearest the sun, was the most populated. Some garden eels appear out of the sandy bottom between Lanzarote and Fuerteventura. These are the most easterly islands and are the only ones that share the same coastal platform. This has led some people to suggest that they may have a continental origin. The rest of the islands, however, are isolated, and there are enormous abysses between them which reach depths of up to 3,000 meters. They are not anchored on the continental platform and lie instead on the thin oceanic crust. The Canaries' current effect is not only noticeable in marine flora and fauna. On the surface too it leaves its mark. The ocean reduces the temperatures and fills the trade winds with humidity. Like the current, these winds come in from the northeast. As they break on the slopes of the volcano, the air is forced up and cools down. The water condenses and clouds appear. With the arrival of the clouds, the islands receive one of their most priceless goods, water. The importance of the trade winds is such that on the same mountain, the windward side receives twice as much rainfall as the leeward side. Something similar occurs with altitude. Above cloud level, there is less than 400 millimeters of rainfall a year, whereas below the clouds this figure can easily be over 800 millimeters. This close relation between the wind, the mountainous terrain and the water has created countless ecosystems in the Canaries. Of all these, the most complex and most fascinating is undoubtedly the ecosystem of the lands of permanent mist. Here the laurisilva grows surrounded almost constantly by clouds. Many of these species inhabited the Mediterranean area during the Tertiary era. The glaciers arrived in the Quaternary and brought with them new plants from the north. The invaders were more resistant to the cold and soon replaced the original forest. In the archipelago, however, the good climate and the state of isolation brought time to a halt. As happened in Arthur Conan Doyle's novel The Lost World, the Canaries did not undergo any notable changes and the flora continued its evolution far away from the problems on the continent. Thanks to this, we can still contemplate the forests that covered Europe millions of years ago. In many places, the forest is so thick that hardly any light reaches the ground, so only moss and ferns can grow there. The vegetation obtains from 2 to 4 times as much water from the mist as from the rain. For this purpose, it has developed shiny perennial leaves which catch the drops of water and channel them to the tip. From there they fall to the ground, where they can be absorbed by the roots. During the summer, almost all the water the plants receive comes from this source. The wealth of fauna is just as spectacular as the flora. There are a large number of endemic species of reptiles and amphibians, and almost 60% of the invertebrates in the forests are exclusive to the archipelago. The island of La Gomera has the most extensive and best conserved laurisilva forest in the archipelago. It occupies the upper part and is the principal nucleus of the Garajoné National Park. Its 2,500 hectares catch so much water from the mist that they have more than they need. The excess filters through the ground and springs up in the little streams which irrigate the land lower down. It is here that the species that makes this strange sound lives. From time immemorial, the inhabitants of La Gomera have communicated by whistling, a unique language which is exclusive to the island. Thanks to this, it was possible for people to speak from one ravine to another without having to meet, something which was very important in a place with such a rugged landscape. However, fewer and fewer people use the whistling language. The improvement in communications and means of transport are hard competitors for this cheap, traditional type of mobile phone. The residents of La Gomera channel the water that comes down from the laurisilva forest and use it to cultivate the lower slopes. There are no flat lands here, so all crops have to be planted on terraces and small plots. In many cases, all the work is done by hand. In spite of this, the gomeros can consider themselves lucky. In Lanzarote, the eruption of 1824 covered the island in ash. The farmers were obliged to dig down to reach their original lands in order to plant their vines again. We do not know for sure who were the original inhabitants of the Canaries. In prehistoric times, it was inhabited by African tribes, ancestors of the Berbers of today. Lanzarote, which is only 70 kilometers from the continent, probably acted as a platform for the conquest of the other islands. Over the course of time, successive waves of immigrants occupied the Canaries. Guanches, Bimbaches, and Benaorites established their respective kingdoms. Their cultures developed in isolation from the continent until the development of trade and navigation in the 13th century made Europe turn its attention to the archipelago. The growing interest in the islands led finally to their conquest in the 15th century. The different tribes were brought under the rule of the Spanish crown and ended up adopting the European lifestyle. Of the ancient cultures, only a few pictures and constructions, such as this monastery at Valerón, remain. The food produced in the island of Gran Canaria was stored in numerous silos dug out of the rock. Today, they are just a tourist attraction. From the 18th century onwards, the Canaries began to interest the naturalists of the time. Their exclusive ecosystems, their unique species, and their volcanic activity made them the center of attention for scholars from all parts of Europe. The conservation of endemic species such as the Galotia stellini, a lizard from Gran Canaria, or of ecosystems such as the Laurisilva forest led the Spanish government to protect the main natural areas on the islands. Of the 9 national parks in Spain today, 4 are here in the Canaries. With the creation of protected areas and the improvement in communications, the islands underwent their latest transformation. Tourism, a new lucrative business, was added to traditional arable and livestock farming. Hundreds of thousands of tourists visit the islands every year. Many come in search of the sun. Others, however, are fascinated by its landscapes and by the volcanic activity still present on some of the islands. The water vaporization and plant burning shows on the islet of Hilario in the Timanfaya National Park are just some of the multiple tourist attractions created in recent years. Just 15 meters underground, the temperature is over 610 degrees centigrade. The magma is not very far below ground and a new eruption could happen at any time. A danger which does not seem to bother the tourists very much. The archipelago is an exceptional place to study the inside of our planet and also the universe around it. The observatory of Roque de los Muchachos is in an excellent location on the island of La Palma. At an altitude of over 2,000 meters, it is higher than the Sea of Clouds. The air is clean and there are no cities with lights which could spoil the view of the sky. The Canaries is also a special place to study the colonization capacity of flora and fauna. Continuous eruptions have meant that landscapes such as these can still be seen today. The same landscapes as when the islands emerged from the sea. After each new eruption, part of the land was buried and the slow process of life had to start again. Thanks to this, you can find all the different stages of vegetation development and the most varied types of fauna all on the same island. The conditions found by the reptiles, insects and birds that started the colonization of the islands are still intact in many places. Along with the wildcat or the rabbit, you can still find species such as the Galeoia simoni, a giant lizard from El Hierro, which can grow up to 70 centimeters in length. Like this lizard, many other species live out their lives among the lichens and the euphorbias on the lava-covered slopes. The archipelago is still in a process of formation. Fumaroles, eruptions and small earthquakes show us that its genesis is still not over. There have been 18 eruptions in the last 500 years. The eruptions in Lanzarote in 1703 and 1736 buried the plain of Timanfaya completely and increased the size of the island by 200 square kilometers. In 1971, this volcano on La Palma, Teneguía, also erupted. The consequences were not as dramatic as in Lanzarote, but it was another warning for the inhabitants of the island. The same forces that created this natural paradise could bury it again under tons of lava. This may seem a catastrophe for man, but for nature it would be just another step in the construction of the archipelago. A project which has been under construction for over 30 million years and is still far from finished.